how powerful would it be if we could self-regulate in that way and find that moment of pause between stimulus and response where we get to choose with full consciousness, how do I want to engage here, rather than the knee-jerk reaction. That's the power and the freedom that we have available to us. But we got to do the work, whether it's years of therapy or daily mindfulness, whatever it is.
Hey, this is Nick Armstrong, and you are tuned into the Founded in FoCo podcast. Every episode, we get a chance to talk to an innovative mover and shaker in our community doing cool and interesting things. And today we are here with Abby. Abby, introduce yourself and tell us about your business.
Hi, all. My name is Abby Veliquette, and I am a coach and consultant in Fort Collins, Colorado. My business is Sequoia Leadership. And what we do is we help organizations, teams, and individuals think about how they work, not just what they're doing. We believe that how you do it matters as well. So we support leaders in developing how to be conscious as leaders. We help them think about how to manage through conflict management. We do one-on-one coaching. And then we also do some work with positive intelligence, which is the content that I'm going to be bringing to the Founded in FoCo conference.
Yeah, so leadership development is a really popular market. How did you get into leadership development in particular?
From a young age, I have always been interested in leadership. Maybe I had a touch of bossiness, or I loved organizing people around a goal or a mission, whether that was like building a fort or going on an adventure, but I've just always been really interested. So I went to school and studied nonprofit leadership because I wanted to understand more about how to empower others, how to help them achieve a shared goal and a shared mission. And so it's been a lifelong journey for me. I went on to study organizational communication and then organizational learning, performance, and change in my PhD. So worked in nonprofit leadership for a while, but for the last 10 years have been supporting other leaders in their development.
Is there a common trend amongst what type of training that local leaders seem to need?
You know, I think that there is an increased interest recently in thinking about the emotional and mental intelligence that we need. So not just the technical skills or even things like delegating, that can be important, but how do we relate to people? How do we understand where other humans are coming from so that we can interact in really thoughtful, meaningful ways? So I see this trend more towards emotional intelligence development, thinking about my positivity intelligence, which is where I'm really focusing lately.
Every leader seems to have that superhero complex of, no, I don't have these problems. What are you talking about? I'm the leader. I'm the one in charge. Or they're hyper aware of their flaws. How do you onboard someone? What does the process look like in order to sort of identify those knowledge gaps or the intelligence or emotional intelligence type questions where there's maybe a knowledge gap that's there in terms of being able to be mindful of oneself?
The reality is we all have gaps and we all can increase our self-awareness. And really, that's what it boils down to, is becoming conscious of the ways that we show up, the choices that we make, so that we're not habitually reacting, but rather we have that moment of pause so that we can choose how we want to show up. So part of it is just doing some self-analysis, and we have some tools like a saboteur assessment. So what are the ways that you in particular self-sabotage so that you can respond to those in kind and find the ability to get that moment of pause so that you can choose to act more consciously, more thoughtfully in your interactions.
Do you have any particular success stories in mind that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, I am a work in progress. I am a success story that I started with. I was cynical about this work. But over several years have been able to find that pause and that mindfulness that's allowed me to show up as a better leader, speaker, but also like a parent and a partner. But I can think about one leader in particular who used to have panic attacks before she would begin speaking, before she had any type of presentation. Incredible imposter syndrome would show up, all that self-doubt. And over the course of our coaching work and the stuff we've done with positive intelligence and positive psychology, she's able to catch that much quicker. It still shows up. You're still going to have those moments, but she's able to catch it quicker and shift out of it. And then she's able to show up beautifully for these presentations and engagements that she has. So That's a huge success story.
What resources exist in this space? You mentioned some self-assessment tools. Are there? I imagine this is not a skill that you can just sort of pick up from a book or just a podcast or something like that. You need to sort of practice and train in these things. What resources exist to sort of start someone on that path?
Yeah, there's a ton of resources. I think what I want to do is give just like a little backdrop here first and then follow up with the resources, because I think that will help us think about what is it that we're actually addressing when I'm talking about this positive intelligence or emotional intelligence and awareness. And the reality is that as human beings, we are physiologically wired to protect ourselves, to find survival. And so when we sense that we're in a difficult situation, our body can interpret that as danger. And so we can kind of shift into a survival brain or a fight or flight or freeze mode, where most of us are familiar with that concept. And that was really helpful for our ancestors who had to literally run for their lives from wild animals or were desperately scavenging for the sustenance that they needed. But for us, in our current experience, the danger or the risk that we experience is often something like a difficult decision, a conflictual conversation. Public speaking is a great example of when that like fight or flight mode shifts on for us. And what happens for us when we shift into that survival or fight or flight mode is that a lot of our executive functioning, some of the sophisticated critical thinking that we have, gets shut down. Because when you're truly in a life or death situation, you really need a narrowed thought action repertoire. So you can just figure out how to get out of that situation and survive. But like I said, the reality is we're usually not in life-threatening situations, but our bodies and our brains can interpret it that way. So we have to figure out how to capture when that's happening and stop it so that we can shift back into what's I will call our positive brain, or what we can call it the sage. It's that best version of ourselves. And my guess is that many of you, like, and you too, Nick, have probably had that experience where you feel like two different people. Like sometimes you're calm and cool and collected and really wise, and other times you feel out of your mind. So this positive brain or this sage, it's that version of yourself that is clear-headed, focused, calm, and collected. And when we're there, we're able to make better decisions, be more creative, innovative, have empathy. And so back to the resources, the actual question, I'm getting there. What we need to do sometimes is trick our bodies and our brains or shortcut some of that physiological stuff that's happening and tell our bodies we're safe. Like you're not in a life or death situation right now. So some of the really simple strategies that we can practice are things that bring us into our bodies and connect us with positive emotions. Because you would never slow down to notice the flowers or look into the eyes of the person in front of you if you were in a life or death situation. So when I take the time to do that, I tell my body, I tell my brain, we're safe, we can do this. So simple things like breath. This is connected very much to what we've been learning and many of you have been practicing in terms of mindfulness or meditation. Deep breath is a shortcut here. Something like rubbing your pointer and thumb finger together with such attention that you can feel the ridges of your fingerprints is a shortcut to like tell your body, I'm safe and I'm calm, I can do this. And then there's tons of resources like daily meditation apps, books that you've heard of like The Happiness Advantage or Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. And then this program, Positive Intelligence, that I've been offering to clients, which helps you build habits over a 7-week period to really strengthen the mental muscles that you have.
The habit loops that so many of us get into can tend to be self-destructive, and taking that moment out to just take a breath and really evaluate our emotional state in that moment, especially for big things that are coming up, whether it's going on stage and negotiating a big contract deal or talking with an employee with those big difficult conversations that come up. Is it just as simple as like having those mindful moments of like, I need to take a pause? And how do you habitualize those things and operationalize those across the entire organization so that every employee is meeting that same energy at that same time?
Okay, there are several really good questions there. So one, yes, it is that simple, but I alluded to it being a muscle that you have. So you are going to have these kind of emotional hijackings or these moments where you're overwhelmed with negativity or fear. we're never going to be able to stop those completely. But what we can do is recover faster. And the way that we recover faster is by strengthening these muscles. We used to think that our brains stopped developing at age 25. We know now that we have neuroplasticity. We can keep growing and learning and building new neural pathways through practice. So what you got to do is have sustained practice. Just like with a physical muscle, you wouldn't just work it out once, go to one workshop, and then say, I'm good for the rest of my life. You got to have a daily mental muscle exercise that you're doing. And so by building those habits, you get better at catching those hijack moments when they show up and then being able to shift out of them. So that's the kind of the answer to the first question. So yes, it's really simple, but it has to be like a sustained practice that you keep up with. And then in terms of like spreading that through an organization, one, it always starts with the individual, and you can influence people around you. We know about emotional contagion. If I show up in a positive brain state, I have the opportunity to influence you. But likewise, if you're hijacked and in the saboteur, self-sabotage mindset, you're going to influence me. So we have to, one, make the effort to show up with that positive brain state and try and influence. But how cool would it be if we could, as a team, as a community, build awareness around what are the ways that fear shows up for us and causes us to shift into that fight or flight survival brain? And what are some habits and practices we can develop as a team to remind each other, hey, it looks like you're showing up in kind of a fear mindset right now. Can we do some breath together to shift to that positive brain state? Another super simple practice that I recommend for all leaders is starting every meeting with a mindful minute and a check-in with the team. So before you get into the to-dos and the task list, take some breaths together, check in and see where everybody's at. And that simple practice can help you all purposefully get into that positive brain state before you do the work. And we know it actually produces more outcomes, higher performance. So even if it feels like it's slowing you down and taking too much time, it's actually going to produce better outcomes.
In terms of purposeful practice for some of these things, because what I heard you say is develop a muscle memory for the to habituate these positive reinforcements. Is this like you have to immerse yourself in sort of a negative environment and things like that stress you out so that you have the ability to? Or, as you said, is it more of an alignment around the process for taking a mindful minute in advance of a meeting?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, I think we all probably encounter enough negative stuff in our day-to-day that we wouldn't have to work too hard to find it, to immerse ourselves in it. But what we know about these kind of mindfulness habits and practices is that it's hard in the moment, right? You've talked about those habitual reactions, the knee-jerk reaction. And what happens with our habitual reactions is that we create these neural pathways that are well-tread in our brain and they're easy to find. So to create new neural pathways, we have to do that work beforehand or even after a difficult meeting or difficult conversation as a way to reflect. And so it really has to be preemptive. So at the beginning of every day, especially if you know you're headed into a difficult situation, a challenging meeting or conversation, just taking a few minutes to do some of this mindfulness work helps you get those neurons firing together for that new neural pathway, so that then when you're in the tense or stressful moment, it's really much easier to find that new pathway of behavior. So yes, hopefully we get better at in the moment catching it, but doing that work beforehand and after and reflection can really help us build those new ways of being.
So Abby, I'm going to raise a question for you, which I think a lot of folks have in the entrepreneurial solopreneur space, right? There's a lot of pressure, a lot of tension to be on brand. And if you show up in a space and you're just like maybe a little bit, stressed out or tweaked out or whatever it is, and there's a moment of like this bootstrapping mentality of like, I have to sort of get myself back in check or whatever it is, right? And it seems to me that there's a component of vulnerability to this where you can be self-aware enough that you say, hey, I need a moment to take a breath here, or can we get some coffee or tea or just chat about our dogs for a minute before we dive into this hard conversation. Have you found a way to access that vulnerability or that key into that moment of like self-awareness a little bit easier than say, when you're midstream in a conversation, it's a lot easier to have had the mindful moment up front. But if you suddenly become aware that you are too stressed out or too invested in a particular outcome, that you're not having a mindful conversation, are there methodologies to key into that midstream?
Well, let me ask you a question, because you said that so tactfully, so people like, hey, I just need a minute here. How did you feel when you were saying that? If you can kind of check in with your body in that moment.
Having had years and years of therapy, I can tell you that it doesn't bother me in the slightest. But I know that there are not those who have had that opportunity to have that therapy. I would anticipate, and I know that from early on, my experiences were like, oh no, I have to be on brand. Like it's okay if I show up a little bit out of character, out of whatever. Like it's just you sort of incorporate that as the brand, and that's maybe
Mhm.
not a healthy choice for everybody. I think that the idea of finding those methodologies and that vulnerability can be tricky, and there are experts in it, such as yourself, that maybe have keyed into ways that make that easier without the years and years of therapy, which are also beneficial, but maybe there's a faster way.
Yeah. Well, we all need years and years of therapy, but I think I think there's a zeitgeist culturally that's saying like, I'm tired of having to show up buttoned up, to have to be this like polished, perfect person. We're all human, wholly human. And how can we show up authentically with transparency and vulnerability? So I asked you that question because when you said that, as a person receiving that, I feel a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, we get to be real. Like, I don't have to pretend either, because the reality is, if you're carrying that angst or feeling like you have to pretend, the other person can feel it. Even if we don't consciously name it, they can feel it. And when you allow yourself to say, I got to take a breath, you invite the other person to also be real and authentic. And maybe there'll be some people that respond poorly to that, but then that's probably not who you want to be interacting with, or maybe there's some more work that needs to be done there. But all that to say that I think particularly younger generations are eager for this. Like we want to be able to show up real and authentic and transparent. Um, yeah, I was going to say something else, but it escaped me. So I think it's just, you got to go for it. You got to try it. And it's usually not as scary as it feels. So do the work beforehand, rub those fingers together, take those breaths, and set the intention that if I feel myself getting hijacked, I'm going to ask for a breath. Or if you're not comfortable saying it, it might be something simple you do, like I'm going to take a drink of water if I feel it coming up in me. That's going to be my reminder to like get present, get calm.
We've all had that experience, I think, of encountering somebody who is very grounded. And so when you have that moment of like, oh, you're really zen right now, and I'm not matching that energy, and being the person who can be in that zen bubble for a few minutes for somebody else seems to be a really powerful way of generating empathy or generating better outcomes for somebody who is stressed in your presence. And
Yeah.
oftentimes with children, often we'll talk about like you have to regulate yourself before you can regulate a child's emotions, and doing that for business partners. Not that your business partners are children, or that you're infantilizing them through the idea of like, if I show up regulated, they can be regulated as well, and that's a
Yeah.
powerful tool for a leader to have.
Yeah. I love that you use that, because this really is about self regulation. How powerful would it be if we could self regulate in that way and find that moment of pause between stimulus and response, where we get to choose with full consciousness, how do I want to engage here, rather than the knee jerk reaction? That's the power and the freedom that we have available to us. But we got to do the work, whether it's years of therapy or daily mindfulness, whatever it is. Yeah.
What will we learn from your session at Founded in FoCo?
So we'll talk more about this. Um, and we're going to look at some of these mental muscles that I was talking about. How do you work on self-command? Being able to focus your attention on something is one of the first muscles. So if I can practice that preemptively, like I'm going to focus on just this beautiful plant in front of me right now, that can help me build those muscles for later. We're going to talk about then how do you intercept self-sabotage. We all self-sabotage in ways that are particular to our personalities or temperaments or dispositions. And so you'll get to take a self-assessment to figure out how do you in particular self-sabotage so that you can be more aware of and catch those saboteurs when they show up. And then finally, how do we strengthen that positive side of our brain, which I'm saying is the sage? How do we build those sage powers so that we can more quickly get there? So we'll talk about this, the philosophy, the physiology behind it all, and then we're going to work on the muscles, and so that you can come away with some practices like that finger rub I was talking about, the breath, and some tools you can use to keep practicing this in your day-to-day.
It sounds incredibly valuable, and thank you so much for bringing it to Founded in FoCo for us this year. Are there any last bits of advice that you want to leave with a listener right now as they contemplate whether or not they're going to add this to their schedule?
I would say if you're on a journey of self-development, of learning, and you're interested in increasing your self-awareness and your consciousness so that you are acting with intention and purpose, this is a beautiful place to start. And it's going to support you with all the other strategic and tactical things that you're doing in your work. So if you're open to increasing that self-awareness, I would love to have you come and share in this learning with me.
Abby, where can we find out more about you and your business?
Yeah, my business website is sequoialeadership.co, and I'm on LinkedIn, Abby Veliquette. All of those things are hard to spell though, so I'm sure my name will be on the title here. And I will be at Founded in FoCo throughout the week, so I look forward to meeting many of you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I can't wait to see you there March 4th through 8th at the Fort Collins Senior Center. You can learn from Abby and all your fellow entrepreneurs who are sharing their knowledge and generously giving it back to you so you can incorporate that into your own business. And new this year, also workshops so you can apply what you've learned and put it directly into practice in your business right away. And we can't wait to see you there. Hey, thanks for listening. I'm Nick Armstrong, and this is a Founded in FoCo podcast. For more great interviews like this one, join us at foundedinfoco.com.